I'm here with Ash of Venom Prison to talk about Erebos, out February 4th on Century Media Records. How's it going with you?
Good, thanks. Thanks for having me as well. But yeah, pretty good my end.
How excited are you guys? Not just you, but the whole band. How excited are you guys about this album just being around the corner so all fans can listen to it?
Oh, like it's amazing. Like I was thinking about it like literally yesterday, how it's only next month. It felt like such a long process. We started writing this maybe start of 2020, possibly. Could have been before it. I know that Primeval that we released for the compilation of our demo and EP, we put 2 new songs on that. But those 2 new songs were actually part of the writing process of Erebos. So it was kind of nice to use Primeval as kind of that foundation to lay ready for Erebos as such. But yeah, I'm really excited. I think it's going to be full of surprises. And I think a lot of people might start seeing us in like a different light and knowing that, you know, what we can bring to the table.
I agree with everything that you said. Based on my experience of going through the album, this record is a little bit like a box of chocolates. You know what I mean? Like you go in thinking that you know exactly what you're going to get, but that's not exactly what you end up getting.
Yeah, exactly. And I love that aspect of it. And I've always said from, you know, the very first day that this band started that we wouldn't do the same record twice. Like I just always feel that Venom Prison has the capability of evolving and progressing and evolving our sound constantly. And I just don't feel the need for Venom Prison to be, you know, put in a box musically, because each member has so many different traits about them that they bring to, you know, the writing process. And it felt from the early stage we kind of just stuck to, you know, what we knew as such. And then, you know, as we evolved as a band, touring more, it's kind of like, hey, why don't we bring this, introduce this into the band and, you know, evolve our sound. And I think when you get to Erebos, I think that becomes really clear of what everyone is capable of doing in the band, like on a music and a, you know, a musician and a creative aspect.
And you used a very important word, growth. When you look at the growth of the band throughout its existence up to this album, what do you feel is the one aspect that you guys have grown the most with that has a deep impact on how this album comes across?
I think this band's never been afraid of, you know, being creative. I think we've always, like, whether it's aesthetics, visuals, anything of like the full, for me it's a full package. I think you can have great, you know, great music and great, you know, like you great records, you can be writing great songs, but like if you're not kind of building this imagery and this aesthetic, it's really hard for listeners to kind of connect with these emotions that are playing, because visually you can't see, you know, these things. And it's kind of like when I look at like some of my favorite records, it's like even from the artwork, it's kind of like you look at the artwork and you can hear that album. And I feel like doing all of our, you know, all of our artwork through Ella and Cantor, we've built this imagery and this aesthetic. And I feel like I was saying to Larissa not long ago, I truly believe that if you remove the Venom Prison, like at this point now, maybe not in the earlier days, but at this point now, I think if you remove the Venom Prison logo, I still think you would know that it's a Venom Prison record. I think that's kind of like that aesthetic that Elleran's kind of molded us into, you know.
It became all part of one single package.
Definitely.
You guys definitely had more time with this record than perhaps previous albums due to everything that's happening in the world around us. Was that time a friend or a foe? Friend, definitely. I think a lot of it was, I think a lot of realization kicked in from Erebos. I think it helped, the time helped a lot. Where previously we would kind of, you know, write a record, tour, come home, keep writing, record, go back on tour, come back, write. And there's no reflection. There's no reflection through any of this. And it's almost like this sporadic, chaotic mess that is just maintained. You've reined it in and you've got control of it, but you deep down, you don't have this, you know, complete grasp on it that you think you do. And I think when Erebos came around the corner, it was having that moment of myself and Ben were talking a lot, and we were just saying like, what would you highlight as flaws? What would you say would need to be ironed out? Where would we progress? We're not writing the same record twice. What do we do? And the one word that come up was, let's just write songs. And I think that's kind of where the moment all fell into place, where we were like, I'm not saying or discrediting anything from, you know, Samsara or Animus or anything like that, but they were meant for, you know, energetic, aggressive assault, full of riffs, you know, and just like screaming, harrowing vocals, where Erebos has kind of taken that step back and gone, what benefits the song? Because we'd only ever been in live, you know, circumstances where, you know, we play stuff off Samsara or Animus and people go mad because we've got the heavy bits going in, or the grind bits with the blast beats and, you know, like circle pits and stuff. But we did take into consideration that, like, we need a record that also can hold its own without it being in a live environment. And I think that was really important for this record, where we kind of come to the realization of, maybe this, you know, like, it will obviously be played live, but from the perspective of, oh, if there isn't live shows, how do we still get someone to sit down and listen to a record over and over again? And it was, let's craft songs and craft a record that just goes through all these different dynamics, and it just stays, in my opinion, interesting, you know. All these different creative things coming in all the time.
You mentioned something that it really speaks to me. You said, we just wanted to create songs. Now, when you're putting an album like this together, do you create the songs with just the song in mind, or at the back of your mind, how these tracks are going to have to coexist with one another in the overall big picture of the record? How much of that comes into play, or is that an afterthought?
Oh, it's definitely very in the process of writing, for me especially, and I know Ben's a very big fan of it. I really like the idea of like soundscape and, you know, the ambience of going in between and intertwining tracks and stuff. But it was also how, when we were laying out the track listing, and we would listen to, you know, everything we'd have up to that point, maybe 4 or 5 songs or whatever it was, and I would listen to them with my headphones in, and it would get to the end of that 5th song, and I would kind of just express how I felt the next song should feel. I felt all these emotions going from start to second to third to fourth. And then it would get to, like, you know, for example, after the 4th song, we have Pain of Voices. And it was like,
different track. Very different.
It felt so right to put that there. And I had such an interesting conversation with our bassist about it. And we were over Ben's place and we were just talking about that song as a whole. And we had this like really long discussion. We were meant to be writing. We ended up talking about it for like 4 hours, but it was like, yeah, that day didn't go too well for writing. We were just talking, but it was good because I've always been a big fan of, like, you know, I love Sabbath and Maiden and, you know, like Ozzy and whatnot. And it kind of like made me realize when he said, he was like, when did bands stop doing songs like this? He was like, Metallica always chucked, you know, Nothing Else Matters or One. And these, like, you know, Ozzy Osbourne on Ultimate Sin, you've got like Killer of Giants and stuff. And like, well, most of Ozzy's back catalogue is ballads generally, but nobody ever said that wasn't metal. Exactly. And like, and that's how and as soon as he said that to me, it just completely resonated through me. And I was like, he's so right. Like, why have I kind of shied away from the idea when realistically we could have just walked into it all along? Yeah. And even after it finished, it just felt like it doesn't feel any less like a Venom Prison song than any other of the songs. It just has a different layer to it, if you know what I mean. Yeah,
and I think that track, there's 2 middle tracks on this record. By the way, the structure that you guys put on this album is phenomenal. It completely surprised me because I was expecting it to be constantly in my face for the whole duration of the album. And once I listened to the record, I felt like you guys built a record that if it was in your face from the beginning, it would overburden the listener by the time you reach the last track. So you have to create some ebbs and flows. And you guys created incredible ebbs and flows because the album starts off super strong, dips in the middle with 2 tracks that have elements of previous songs, but it also includes things that you haven't really heard before. And then you guys kind of go back to the beginning of the formula and finish off the album super strong. So this structure to me really enhances the quality of the song. So was this created as the process of the songs being created is being put together? Are the two things happening simultaneously?
Yeah, they were happening all at the same time. It was, I think we kind of ended up demoing. I think we ended up demoing about 20 songs, I think, and a lot of the songs I was listening to with Ben, I was like, this could be Samsara, version 2, or this could be Animus version 2, and I remember saying that I shouldn't be able to identify it as that. If I can identify it as that, then someone else can. And those songs just kind of like made its way to an unused folder, and there were so many songs, but it's because it wasn't giving Erebos we knew what it needed. It was just kind of writing and keep creating new songs to kind of find what that missing piece was and what was really going to create a dynamic of this constant up and down, and you're never sure where the album's leaving you. You're never really quite sure, are we going to a heavy bit, or are we just going to come into more of a progressive section with a lot of clean stuff? And it kept me as a musician writing very interested. And when we went to record with Scott, we recorded with Scott Atkins, and he was even saying to us, he was like, this is really interesting that you want to kind of create these moods and kind of pull people away from something that's just been hammering them for 3 minutes, and you're like, no, you need this for a minute, and then that dynamic comes back and it just hits you. And I think the overall conclusion I thought of it was, everything's used so sparingly. We haven't overused clean vocals, we haven't overused these progressive sections, we haven't overused blast beats and breakdowns. We've kind of just put them where it felt right. And I think that's what made Erebos work, in my opinion, so much better than anything we've ever done before, is because nothing falls into place for the sake of it. It was there were songs in the writing process where there would have been, a couple of breakdowns in one of the songs, and you would listen over, to the demos, and it would almost be what purpose did it serve? And I couldn't figure it out. I couldn't figure out I was like, this is heavy, but what is it doing to the song? I need to remember that there's songs. And I think once I got into that frame of mind, and we all did, it just started becoming a lot more interesting, and these new elements started kind of leaking in, and nothing felt forced or nothing felt unnatural. It just felt like we were kind of allowing ourselves to just put more of ourselves on the record. I think it's the most honest Venom Prison record to date, if you ask me personally. I think it would represent the band more so as people than anything else.
And I think one of the beauties of it is that you guys took these strange paths, perhaps you would call them strange paths, outside of the norm, but you always find a way to come back into the original path. So it's you would grow these branches, but then all the branches would still part of that main tree. And I think that's why the album has that sense of continuity, because the diversity that it offers from track to track, there's still enough consistency in there that the record feels as one and not necessarily just a collection of songs. Do you agree with that?
100%. Yeah, that was kind of the aim, to be honest. It was meant to be it was kind of imagined as a soundscape, and going through all these different emotions of the way the dynamics are coming in and stuff, and it creates so much more atmosphere. And I feel when the bits get when the dark bits come in, they're so much darker. When the cleaner bits come in, they're so much cleaner, because it's just not used over and over again. It's so sparing, but it isn't forcing listeners to be hey, this is Venom Prison, get used to this new idea. It's no, this is just incorporated now. We haven't left anything behind. We're just bringing this in. And I think that's kind of why the reaction for when we put Pain of Voices up, the single, I think a lot more people were on board with it than weren't, if you know what I mean.
I have to pick your brain. The opening track of the album threw me for a loop, because it sounds like an intro track, which normally it's just instrumental, but then you guys threw vocals at it. So it's okay, now it's a really short track, but it still feels like an intro track. I'm not quite sure what it is, but it freaking works. What was the thought process?
So this is now to go back to a previous question. So it's I really liked the way we did this, and it's kind of my favorite bit. So it's Erebos is born from chaos. The song is about being born from chaos, the bringer of darkness, and the key and the the arrangements of all the orchestral pieces and stuff, and the way it plays out. When you listen to Technologies of Death, that intro repeats at the end of Technologies of Death, and it's the full cycle of the album. It's kind of being born from chaos yet again, and it was kind of a way of, if it was to be played live, it's kind of the stage starter. I think it would be a very cool way to introduce Erebos to a live atmosphere, like if we haven't played in a while and stuff, and which we've only been doing festivals, but for example, when we do festivals this year, people are going to be expecting us to play songs off that record, and to kind of give a nod to that, opening with something like that is like going to really confirm to people in the crowd, like, oh, they're actually going in on this, they're doing it. So it was like and it's such a big moment as well, like the way like the guitar like lead comes in and like all the chant vocals come in, and it's just like fully confirms you're definitely listening to Erebos. If you know what I mean.
Yeah. No, it was such an interesting way of starting the record. Like, I mean, I was shocked, I was surprised, but it was such a nice way of like saying, hey, this is a new record. This is the kind of crap you can expect throughout the entire record, which is, you don't know what you're going to expect, because we're going to throw some curveballs at you. Now, when it comes to the guitar sound, I love the guitar sound on the record, and I really enjoyed the solos. Was there a homework done on those solos, or it was more of an organic result of how you felt the track was going and what it needed in order to feel more complete?
It always goes with the track. We never kind of force anything onto it unless it feels like it's meant to be there. Like, for example, Judges of the Underworld, when it comes into those sweet picked leads, like towards the bridge section to the further end of the song, it was originally one guitar, and then like Ben was like, we need to harmonize this, like how cool is this? And we were like, let's extend the bars, let's make this section longer, let's make a big deal of this section, because we haven't really been known to do that too much, where we kind of flesh out a big bridge section with like lots of atmosphere, and kind of I feel like it builds more of a theme than it acts as a solo, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And then same with
it also lets the song breathe a little bit more.
Yeah, it's kind of like I remember Ben saying to me, like, he was always saying that you don't need to be the most technical guitarist or the most incredible guitarist to build a mood and a theme to something. Like, sometimes it can just be following a melody of something, and you kind of build this idea in your head of like the melody as such. And it's the same with like Pain of Oisies, where you have that like really cool like Dave Gilmour, Pink Floyd-esque like clean solo type thing, and Ben was like recording that bit, and it was like doing a bit more, and I was like, no, you can't do more, like that's like it's in the pocket, that's where it needs to be. And it was more just kind of like restraint almost, like where it's like everyone wants to just go insane on a guitar solo and do all this mad shit, and like sometimes it doesn't need that. Sometimes it just needs to sit in the pocket. And even like if you ask Ben, like he doesn't even consider that a solo on Pain of Oisies. But I'm like, that's only because we've all been drilled in to believe that it's wah pedals and dive bombs and tap in. But sometimes it could just be building a theme and an emotion, and that's enough to be a perfect solo as such. Like, look at Dave Gilmour, a lot of Pink Floyd stuff, like they're not, they just sat in the pocket.
I agree 100%. This record, I really have to ask you this question, because this is the sensation that I got listening to the album, but I want to hear from you in terms of what went into making it. I've always felt like you guys were a band that were able to connect the lyrics with the vocal performance. But on this album, I really felt that you can't break them apart at all. The way the vocals come across and the lyrical content are completely tied with one another. One is the extension of the other. The vocals are going where the mood of the lyrics are taking you. Do you see that being perhaps maybe not different from previous albums, but a little bit better defined on this record?
100%. Yes. This was something that we really tried to dial in. Like this was like a real important thing for us, where normally it'll be the music, and then obviously we'll put the vocals and the lyrics together to the songs. However, this time round, when I was sending, demos to Larissa and stuff, and I would always say to her, like, hey, you've got your lyrics. And essentially when she starts writing lyrics, it's just a Word document with words, like there's no pattern, there's no hook, there's no structures. And I would always say that, hey, I've never said this in the past because I never thought about saying this in the past. But if you get a vocal line where your hook is killer and it's so catchy and you are completely sold that that's a hook, you tell me if that bar needs to be longer. We'll repeat that riff 20 times if you want us to. Like, I have no problem with it. And if you get to a section where you're like, hey, this riff, I've got this hook on there and it almost sounds like a chorus, cool, I'll find a way to repeat that riff in the song. And that's kind of the way, like, a lot of the song structures were changing as the lyrics were going on the songs, because we were getting to bits, like especially in Judges of the Underworld, like with the Guilty as Charged chorus bit. And
which I love, by the way. I mean, it doesn't get more hooky than that.
That was only actually on the demo, that was actually only played once. And that hook was so big that, like, I said to Larissa, I was like, yo, that's so good. I was like, that's a chorus. And she was like, oh, okay. And I was like, well, let's repeat this section again. And then that's kind of the way we went through the writing process, that every time I would like listen to the demos and I'd be like, that line is killer. Like, why are we not coming back to it? So we just started kind of collaborating more with it, rather than just going, hey, here's the song, sing over it. It's like, no, what do you need us to do to kind of make your hooks bigger and better, and just sit with the listeners more? And it was definitely like a very conscious decision whilst we were going through demo stage, just to kind of be like, I'm fully sold on this hook, it needs to come back, we're going to bring it back, no problem. So yeah, it definitely does sit in the pocket more with instrument and vocals on this record, because we did purposely make sure that we went out the way to kind of create, like, and it goes back to, at the very start, like songs. I just wanted to make sure that every member had, their moment of, putting their best selves on it. Like, for example, there's so many bits on this record where I love some of the bass licks. And like, I'm a sucker for bass guitars. Like a good bass lick I'm sold any day. And it would just be moments where like Mike, our bassist, would come in with a really sweet, like bass lick and just a really nice pattern going on. And me and Ben would be doing something hectic, and we would just say to each other, hey, let's change our parts. Let's pull back. His part's great. Like, his part's better than ours, really. So let's pull back. Like, let's kind of, let's wring this out a bit. Let's like make some space for people. So Erebos has a lot more space for everyone, I feel. And I think that's why it shines a lot more, because it's giving every angle of the members' abilities as such.
As a songwriter, working with somebody like Larissa, does that give you more tools that that, she's a great vocalist, she has an incredible range, power, emotion that she brings out? Does that give you more to work with, knowing that she's going to be able to deliver regardless of what you put together?
Yeah, definitely. It's always great. It's always really great, because when writing, like, I've never really got like the lyrics or the vocals in my head at that point. I'm just trying to structure something and trying to build this song, or just at least get to the end of it, if you know what I mean. And it's always like, no matter what song it is, she's very good at that delivery. She's very good at delivering that emotion in, her techniques and the way she kind of themes songs as such. So every song we got to, like when we were doing Pain of Oisies, I remember like when Ben sent the demo for that song out, and instantly she was like, I'm singing on this song. And I was like, yeah, I'm into this. Like, like, I admire the fact that you kind of, just going for it. And from that moment, every song we wrote, it was almost like I could hear what I could feel. I knew that the vocal delivery was going to kind of complement that and like give it the aggression that it needs, or give it like a bit of compassion. I feel like there's more compassion in Erebos than, anything we've done to date. And I just think in terms of like vocal delivery and vocal performance, it by far is leaps and bounds of anything previous, because I feel like it's so much more honest and it's so much more natural. There were so many things we learned from, you know, recording with Scott Atkins, and, you know, in the past we may layer vocals a bit and stuff, and he would just be like, why are you doing that? Like, her voice is so powerful, like give her the clarity, like let's not be layering and clouding this up. And it kind of stripped everyone back almost to kind of be like, no, we can do this. We don't need all this, like, you know, I can't really figure a word for it, but like artificialness. Everything was organic. Like he would never let me drop in on something. He'd be like, you messed that bit up, you play that bit. And I'm like, oh God. So even if I was there for like 6 hours, he'd be like, I am not dropping you in halfway on this section. You will play this section. And I'm like, okay. And he was like, I am not having a chopped up record. He was like, I want this to be you guys as pure as possible. And I think listening back to Erebos, like I fully understand what he means now. It took a lot of time to realize, but I do realize it now.
One last question for you. This is a record that I felt like it didn't break from the past, like you said. It brought everything that you guys have learned to this point, but it also redefines the band as perhaps as you going forward. Do you see this as one of those records that is what happened before this album and what happens after this album?
Yeah, I feel Erebos has definitely now kind of opened a lot of doors up for us in terms of that creative approach. And I think doing Primeval and revisiting the older songs, you know, was such a, and same again, back to, yeah, reflection. Like it was such a big help to kind of like do Primeval again, because I hadn't played any of those songs in so long. Like since the band started, I probably hadn't played those songs, and kind of just going back to it and going, this riff was so cool, but I didn't overcomplicate it. And like being like, actually, how do I incorporate that into Erebos without kind of going back to basics? And it was just like learning that like sometimes that solid riff that you think should only be 4 bars can be so much longer and just have a massive hook. And I wasn't thinking about vocals at the time. I was thinking just like about the, you know, the guitar playing. And when I got to the point where I was like, this riff can be simple, but if the hook over it's killer, it just makes a great moment. And I don't think if we didn't revisit Primeval and kind of get these new influences coming in, I don't think I would have had that time to reflect and realize and kind of get the outcome that Erebos has, because it was the reflection that made all those pieces fall into place, and the realization came in, and I really understood what was going on. And Ben would, you know, he got really into like synthesizers, and I was doing electronics with him and stuff. And it was just things that we were like, why can't we do this? Like, why can't Venom Prison have this? And I think it was always like, people would be like, you know, you'd explain it via text and it'd be like, oh, sounds risky. And I'm like, yeah, well, it would. It would, wouldn't it? If I tell you that, yeah, the new record's got synths and electronics on, yeah, it would. But it's about understanding how to like not overuse something and use it to the point where it makes it tasteful. And, you know, like when I was like, oh, there's cleans on the new record, and everyone's like, oh, you're going down that route. And it's like, no, we're not going down that route. We know what route we're going down, because we're not overusing it. We're not trying to make it cheesy. We're not trying to pretend that it's something it's not. It was just moments that felt right. And there isn't a moment in the record that I think like, oh, we pushed that a bit too much. It's like, no, it kind of stops when it needs to stop. When it never gets too much. And I think that's kind of where Erebos has left us, in that like really hungry position now, where we're kind of like, oh, we're getting a bit more daring with like, you know, trying to add things in. But we know that our main, you know, foundation and roots is that core sound of Venom Prison, and we can't get rid of that, nor would we. Mm-hmm. So it'll only ever just bring new things in. It won't like morph into something totally different that you'll never be able to identify.
And I think this record really does that for you guys. Ash, thank you very much for your time, man. This was an absolute pleasure to pick your brain about this record. It allows me to now even make more sense of the experience that I had listening to it. So thank you very much for your time. All the best to you and everybody in the band with this release. February 4th comes out on Century Media. Take care of yourself.
Cheers. Thank you. And thank you for having me as well.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
All right.